Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
This time, we're going to tackle something, um, well, it's fascinating for sure.
A bit of a headache, too.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking narcissism.
Ooh, that's a good
We've got
one.
a whole stack of articles here
Mm.
all about, narcissistic personality disorder, the whole NPD thing,
Right.
and just dealing with those, narcissistic tendencies you see everywhere.
Oh, yeah. Partners, bosses, even friends sometimes.
Mm. Don't even get me started. So, our mission today, basically we want to give you the tools to spot those narcissistic, well, behaviors, I guess, and then, of course, how to deal with them.
Essential skills in today's world, for sure.
No kidding.
Yeah.
But first, we got to lay the groundwork.
Definitely. Important to remember, we're not just talking about someone who's a little vain or selfish here.
Right.
NPD, it's a clinical diagnosis. It has very specific criteria.
Okay, so we're talking like the real deal, but I mean, even if someone doesn't have full-blown NPD.
Oh, absolutely. Those narcissistic traits, they can still wreak havoc in your life.
Oh, tell me about it. So that's what we're going to unpack today. Both the clinical side, AND, just like those everyday narcissistic tendencies you run into.
Sounds good.
Now, some of you might be thinking, wait, how common is this really? I mean, is this something I really need to worry about?
Oh, you definitely need to worry about it. Our sources, they say it's up to like 5% of the population.
5%? Wow, that's way more than I thought.
Right. So chances are you've either dealt with this already or you will at some point.
Okay, so this is definitely relevant. Thanks for clarifying that. So let's get practical then. How do we actually spot a narcissist? Like, what are the signs?
Well, our sources, they highlight a few key things. This grandiose sense of self-importance, like living in a fantasy world.
Oh, I know the type. Always the main character.
Exactly. Then there's that constant need for praise, admiration, that whole thing.
Oh, yeah. And feeling like they deserve special treatment all the time.
Yep. And watch out, because they can be really good at exploiting others.
Oh, using people to get what they want.
Yep. Or putting them down to make themselves feel better.
Okay, so this isn't just about being a little self-centered. This is a whole, pattern of behavior.
Right. Exactly.
So, really get this. Examples help.
Sure.
Can you give us some real-life situations where these signs, actually play out?
Okay, so think about someone who, always has to be the center of attention.
Okay.
They're constantly bragging about their achievements, name-dropping important people.
Oh, yeah. The look at me, I'm so important type.
That's the one. They might even, completely ignore other people's achievements.
Yeah.
Because no one else measures up to them in their mind.
Ugh, I can see how that would get old fast. Okay, what about that need for constant praise?
Right. Well, you'll notice them fishing for compliments all the time. But here's the kicker.
What's that?
They can't handle any feedback. Even if it's, constructive and well-intentioned.
So you're telling me, any criticism sends them into a tailspin?
Pretty much. Anger, defensiveness, even a full-blown meltdown. It's like their ego is this, super fragile thing that can't handle a hit.
So they need that constant validation to prop themselves up.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about that sense of entitlement our sources mentioned?
Oh, right. That's a big one. Imagine someone who expects special treatment everywhere they go.
Oh, gosh, I've met a few of those.
Restaurants, stores, even within their own family, they want to be treated like royalty. And if they don't get their way, watch out.
Tantrums.
Oh, yeah. Or they blame everyone else for their mistakes. It's all about this deep-seated belief that they deserve more than everyone else.
Like they're playing by a different set of rules.
Exactly.
But you mentioned earlier that not all narcissists are created equal.
Right.
Can you break down those different types a bit more?
Sure. When people think narcissists, they usually picture the grandiose type, right?
Yeah, the loud, attention-seeking type.
Right. The life of the party. Always in the spotlight. But then there's the vulnerable narcissist.
Vulnerable narcissist, what's that?
They might seem more introverted or insecure even. They can be hypersensitive to criticism.
Interesting. So not all narcissists are super confident and outgoing?
No. They can be quiet, even play the victim to get sympathy, but underneath, they've still got that same inflated sense of self-importance that's just masked by these other things.
So there's more than meets the eye with them. Okay, our sources also mention something called malignant narcissism. That sounds pretty scary.
Yeah, that's considered one of the most severe forms.
What makes it so bad?
It's like they combine the classic narcissism with this aggression, paranoia, even sadistic tendencies.
Whoa, that sounds really dangerous.
It can be incredibly destructive to the people around them, yeah.
So knowing these different types seems pretty important.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it's not just about labeling someone, right? It's about understanding how their specific type of narcissism might affect you and what strategies will actually work.
Exactly. Because let's be honest, dealing with any level of narcissism can be tough. But, why should you care?
Right. Why bother with all this? It's easy to dismiss this as just a difficult personality thing.
Oh, for sure.
But from what I'm seeing in these sources, narcissistic behavior, whether it's from a partner, a family member, a friend, whoever, it can really impact your well-being.
No question.
It's not just annoying. It can be seriously damaging.
It can. Imagine feeling like you're constantly walking on eggshells.
Oh, I know that feeling. Always worried about saying the wrong thing, setting them off.
Right. Never knowing what might trigger their anger or, disapproval, their need for control, for manipulation. It's exhausting.
Mentally and emotionally draining.
Absolutely. And it can even lead to, anxiety, depression.
And that's not even talking about stuff like gaslighting,
Ugh, gaslighting. Don't get me started.
where they try to make you doubt your own memories and, your perception of reality.
Exactly. It's so insidious.
Yeah. So all the more reason to, recognize the signs and have some strategies for coping.
Couldn't agree more. It's about protecting your own mental and emotional health. That's the bottom line.
Okay, so let's get into the strategies then. What can our listeners actually do when faced with, someone showing these narcissistic tendencies? What's the first line of defense?
Well, one of the most crucial things, and our sources hit this point hard, is setting boundaries.
Boundaries. Okay.
Yeah.
We've talked about those before on the show.
Of course.
But why are they especially important when we're talking about narcissists? What makes this different?
Because narcissists, they have this, deep-seated sense of entitlement.
Right. They're the exception to every rule.
Exactly. They disregard of other people's needs and limits. It's like those things don't even register with them.
So boundaries are a way of protecting yourself.
Exactly. Like drawing a line in the sand and saying, nope, this far, no further.
I like that.
It's about reclaiming your own space, your own autonomy.
Okay, so boundaries are key. But what might those look like in real life? Give us some practical examples our listeners can use.
Sure. Let's say the narcissist in your life constantly interrupts you.
Oh, classic.
Right. A clear boundary would be to politely but firmly state, I'd like to finish my thought.
Okay, simple enough. But what if they just, steamroll over you and keep talking?
Then you disengage from the conversation. Walk away, put on your headphones, whatever you need to do to reinforce that boundary.
So actions speak louder than words.
100%. And, what if they try to pull the guilt trip or manipulate you into giving in?
Oh, they're masters at that.
Right. So that's where consistency is key. You can't make empty threats with a narcissist. They'll see right through it. You have to be willing to back up your boundaries with actions, not just words.
Okay, so you got to follow through. Put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. And if they try to lay on the guilt, calmly repeat your boundary and, if necessary, disengage.
So basically, stick to your guns.
Yes. And remember, you are not responsible for their feelings or reactions.
That's a good one to remember. It's about, breaking that cycle of feeling like you always have to appease them.
Exact.
It's about taking back your power.
Yes. You got it. Another crucial strategy, and this one is tough, but so important.
Okay, I'm listening.
Don't take their behavior personally.
Oh, man, that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
How do you actually do that? Because it can feel so personal, especially if it's, someone you're close to.
I know. It's incredibly difficult, but it's essential for protecting your own well-being. Remember, narcissists are masters of projection.
Projection, what do you mean?
They take their own flaws, their own insecurities, and they project them onto other people.
So it's like a defense mechanism.
Exactly. It's a way to avoid taking responsibility for their own stuff.
Interesting.
So when they're lashing out at you, try to reframe the situation. Remind yourself that their negativity, it's their baggage, not yours. You don't have to absorb it.
So deflect it back to the sender.
Yes. Don't let their issues become your issues.
I like that. So I'm guessing this means arguing with them is a bad idea.
Oh, yeah. Trying to, reason with a narcissist, get them to see your point of view.
Yeah, like a rational discussion.
Forget it. It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall.
Totally.
It's frustrating, and in the end, it's pointless. They're so caught up in their own worldview that genuine understanding just isn't possible.
Okay, so if we're not arguing, does that mean we just, silently agree with everything they say?
No. You can absolutely calmly and clearly state your disagreement.
Okay, so you're allowed to disagree.
Yes. But don't get sucked into a debate. Engaging with them just fuels their need for control, for validation. And that's a game you'll never win.
Got it. Choose your battles. So we've got boundaries, not taking things personally, and avoiding those arguments. What else can our listeners do? Any other tools for this narcissist navigating toolkit?
One of the most powerful things you can do is focus on your own needs.
Focus on my needs. Okay.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in trying to please a narcissist to get their approval.
Oh, I know that trap. You end up bending over backward and it gets you nowhere.
It's a never-ending cycle, exhausting. And it often comes at the expense of your own well-being. So make sure you're carving out time for things that bring you joy, things that nourish your soul.
So prioritize yourself.
Exactly. Pursue your passions, nurture your self-esteem, and remember, you are worthy and valuable no matter what the narcissist might say or do.
That's a good one to remember. And I'm guessing this is where having a good support system comes in, like people outside the narcissist's influence.
Huge. You need those healthy relationships to ground you, to remind you who you really are. Because the narcissists, they're going to try to distort that image.
Yeah, they'll try to twist things around to fit their narrative.
Right. So seek out people who uplift you, who validate your feelings, who see your worth clearly.
Good advice. Those relationships are like lifelines.
They are essential for maintaining perspective and getting your emotional needs met in a healthy way.
Okay, we've got a solid set of strategies here. But what about those situations where, like, the narcissism goes beyond those everyday annoyances, where it becomes, like, really toxic, maybe even abusive?
Right.
How do we know when that line's been crossed? And what do we do?
That's when things get really, really serious. And, it's more common than people think. Our sources, they make it clear that this behavior, it can escalate.
Escalate, like into what?
Emotional abuse, even physical abuse. It's not always just, those annoying personality quirks.
Okay, so how do we know if things have crossed that line? What are the red flags?
Well, we already talked about, verbal attacks, the manipulation, gaslighting, that whole thing.
Right.
But it can go further. Think like isolating you from your friends and family.
Oh, yeah, trying to control who you see, who you talk to.
Exactly. Or controlling your finances.
Oh, wow. Or even your movements, like where you can go, what you can do.
Yep. And then there are the threats, threats of violence or actual physical harm.
Okay, this is heavy stuff. And I imagine it can be really hard to see clearly when you're in the middle of it.
Oh, absolutely.
So what's the most important thing for our listeners to remember? Like, if they think things might be heading in this direction, what should they do?
Your safety, your well-being, that comes first. Always. It's not your job to fix them.
Right. You can't change someone who doesn't want to change.
Exactly. Leaving a relationship with a narcissist, especially an abusive one, it's hard, incredibly hard. But sometimes it's the only option.
You have to put yourself first.
Exactly. And that's where, professional help can be so important.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. What does that look like? And when is it, like, really necessary?
Well, if you think you might have some narcissistic tendencies, therapy can be really valuable.
So even the narcissist can get help.
Yeah, potentially. But, it takes self-awareness, which honestly is pretty rare with NPD.
Right, because they often don't see it as a problem. They think everyone else is the problem.
Exactly. But it's not impossible. And then for people who are on the receiving end of this behavior, therapy can be like a lifeline.
Yeah, safe space to, like, process all that emotional damage.
Right. And to rebuild your self-esteem, learn healthy ways to cope with the narcissist.
Or even just to, like, move on from the relationship entirely.
Yes. It's about empowerment, taking back control.
That's what I really want our listeners to take away from this, that feeling of empowerment.
Me too.
Knowing the signs, having those strategies in place, it's like you're suddenly equipped to deal with something that used to feel completely overwhelming.
For sure. Knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
The more you understand about narcissism, the less likely you are to be, like, blindsided by it.
So true. So let's recap then, just to, like, make sure everyone's got those key takeaways, those practical tools they can start using today.
Okay, so first up, boundaries.
Boundaries. We've said it a million times.
Because it's that important. Be clear, firm, consistent, and don't give in to the guilt trips, the manipulation. Don't play their game.
Don't take the bait.
Yes. And remember, don't take it personally. Their negativity, it's theirs to carry, not yours.
Love that. Okay, what else?
Focus on your needs. What brings you joy? What makes you feel good? Do more of that. And surround yourself with people who get you, people who see your worth. Build that strong support system.
Those positive people are so important. They remind you who you really are. And then if you're in a situation that feels dangerous, abusive, please remember you have the right to leave. Your safety comes first. Always.
Couldn't agree more. Reach out to someone you trust, a friend, a family member, a professional. You don't have to go through this alone.
Solid advice. Now, I'm sure some of our listeners are wondering, like, is there hope for the narcissist? Can they actually change?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
What do our sources say?
Well, it's not easy. NPD, it's deeply ingrained. And for lasting change, it takes a lot of self-awareness, which, let's face it, a lot of narcissists just don't have. It's hard for them to admit there's even a problem when their whole worldview is built around being, perfect and superior.
So it's not impossible, but it's definitely an uphill battle.
For sure. But our sources, they do mention that with the right kind of therapy, long-term therapy, some narcissists, they can learn to manage their behavior.
So there's a glimmer of hope.
Yeah. But it all hinges on them taking that first step, acknowledging that they need help.
Which is often the hardest part.
Right. But, for those of us who are dealing with narcissists, understanding that even small changes are possible, that can make a difference in how we approach those interactions.
It's about managing expectations, not expecting, like, a complete overnight transformation.
Exactly.
But even a little shift in their behavior, a willingness to acknowledge the impact of their actions, that can change the dynamic. And it all starts with awareness.
Speaking of awareness, one thing that really jumped out at me from these articles?
What's that?
This idea of love bombing. Have you ever come across this?
I have, yeah.
Yeah.
But I bet some of our listeners haven't.
Maybe. So, what's the deal with love bombing? Is it as romantic as it sounds?
I think we both know the answer to that.
Not even close. It's a tactic that narcissists use, especially early on in a relationship. Think like overwhelming affection, constant attention, lavish gifts.
Sounds kind of nice, actually.
Right. But it's all designed to sweep you off your feet before you really know who they are.
So it's manipulation.
100%. It's a way to get you hooked before those red flags start popping up.
Wow, that's sneaky. And I bet it works really well, especially if you're someone who, craves that kind of attention.
Oh, absolutely. You get caught up in this whirlwind romance, and then boom, you're in deep before you realize something's not right.
Okay, this is definitely something people need to be aware of. So how can our listeners tell the difference between genuine affection and this, love bombing tactic? What should they be looking for?
Pay attention to the intensity, the speed. Love bombing, it happens fast, like really fast.
So it's like they're trying to fast forward the relationship.
Exactly. Declaring their undying love after 2 dates, showering you with extravagant gifts. It's all about creating that instant, overwhelming connection.
So trust your gut, right? If the pace feels off, if it's too much too soon, that's a sign to maybe slow down.
Yes, 100%. Another red flag is inconsistency. Like their words and actions, they don't match up.
What do you mean?
So they might say all the right things, profess their deep love, but then they disappear for days, weeks even. No explanation.
Oh, so they're playing games, keeping you off balance.
Exactly. It's all about control. They want you to be dependent on their affection, their validation, and once you're hooked, it becomes much easier to manipulate you.
This is starting to sound like a psychological thriller. But seriously, this is important stuff. Knowing about these tactics can really protect people. So what's the best way to avoid falling victim to love bombing?
Trust your instincts. If something feels off, if that intensity is making you uncomfortable, don't ignore it.
And don't be afraid to pump the brakes a little. A real connection, it takes time to build.
Exactly. And pay attention to those inconsistencies. If their words and actions aren't lining up, that's a major red flag.
Major red flag.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. And, I think it's important to remember you're worthy of love and respect, regardless of what the narcissist might try to make you believe. Don't settle for a relationship that feels conditional or leaves you feeling drained and insecure.
Yes. Preach.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. I want to talk about how narcissism plays out in the workplace.
Oh, yeah.
Because our sources had a lot to say about that. What were some of the key things that stood out to you?
Well, picture a boss who takes all the credit for their team's successes.
Ugh, I've had one of those.
Right. Or they micromanage every single detail. They can't handle even a tiny bit of constructive feedback.
Oh, yeah. The my way or the highway type.
That's the one. And it can be so demoralizing for their employees. They feel undervalued, unappreciated. They're even afraid to speak up, worried about retaliation.
And that fear, it just kills creativity.
Totally. It's like the narcissist's need for control creates this stifling environment where everyone's walking on eggshells.
So what can you do if you're stuck working with or for a narcissist?
Honestly, there's no easy answer. It really depends on the situation, how severe the narcissism is, what your position is within the company. But some of the same strategies we talked about earlier, they can still be helpful.
Okay, like boundaries. But how does that work in a workplace setting?
It's about being clear, assertive, even with someone who's in a position of authority. So, for example, if the narcissist is constantly interrupting you in meetings, you can say something like, I'd appreciate it if I could finish my thought.
Okay, so still being polite but firm.
Exactly.
What about documenting everything? Especially if you're dealing with someone who's, like, prone to gaslighting or twisting the truth.
Oh, that's a great point. That documentation, it can be crucial.
Yeah, like if you need to report them to HR or, take legal action.
Exactly. It creates a paper trail, protects you.
Good advice. And remember, you don't have to suffer in silence.
Yeah.
Talk to someone you trust.
Yes.
A colleague, a mentor, whoever.
Find your allies. And if it gets to the point where it's just unbearable, you always have the option to leave. Sometimes that's the healthiest choice. Removing yourself from that toxic environment.
Right. You don't have to sacrifice your mental health for a job.
Absolutely not. No job is worth that.
Man, we've covered a lot of ground today. Romantic relationships, families, the workplace. Narcissism really can pop up anywhere.
It's everywhere, which is why this knowledge is so important.
For sure.
It really is. It's like once you open your eyes to this stuff, you start seeing it everywhere.
It's kind of scary, actually. And what's interesting is it's not always so obvious,
Oh,
It
yeah.
can be really subtle, sneaky even.
Totally. Which is why it's so important to understand, the nuances of it all.
Exactly. And that's what I love about these deep dives,
What do we love about them?
We go beyond just those basic explanations and really dig into the details. It's about giving our listeners knowledge they can actually use.
Right. Tools for their toolbox.
Exactly. And we've given them, the cheat sheet version here. But honestly, there's so much more out there.
Oh, yeah.
Whole books, studies, support groups, you name it.
The rabbit hole goes deep.
It does. But I think the main takeaway here is that, knowledge isn't enough. You got to actually apply it.
Right?
Use it to build healthier boundaries, stronger relationships, a better sense of self.
It's all about taking action.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious what really stuck with you. What strategies, what insights are you going to start using today to deal with, those inevitable narcissistic encounters?
Well, we've covered a lot.
We have.
Boundaries, not taking things personally, focusing on your needs, that support system, all of that, it's gold.
Solid gold advice. And don't forget about those red flags.
Oh, yeah.
The inflated ego, the constant need for admiration, that tendency to, use people.
Right.
Once you know what to look for, you'll be amazed at how often you start spotting these traits.
It's like you suddenly have X-ray vision, right?
Yeah.
You can see through the facade.
Exactly. Understanding narcissism, it's empowering. It gives you more control, more clarity, and ultimately more peace of mind.
Couldn't agree more.
So keep exploring this topic, keep learning, and remember, you're not alone.
Never.
There are resources out there, people who get it, and strategies that work.
Yeah.
So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deep.